The only good thing about the Rugby Championship format this year is that the Springboks and the All Blacks get to play against each other 2 weeks in a row. And it feels like a mini tour because both of those games are in South Africa. Of course, a slight disadvantage for the All Blacks. The game last week was a good game. There were a lot of errors. But despite that offered a bit of backward and forward. It sort of evened the game out, but it was an expansive game, let's be fair, and it was closer than what people expected. Unfortunately, most people have been talking about the refereeing decisions. Let's have a quick look at that list. Bongi Mbanambi's knock-on, the shot clock blunders. I guess there was issues with the on-ground clock and the clock that we see on TV or whatever. The New Zealand try at the line-out, the double banking, you had the Sam Cane tackle on Khaleesi, Adi Savia turnover penalty at the end, amongst others. But as I said in my preview video before the game, I hoped that the refereeing sort of didn't impact on the game. It did, but let's forget the refereeing for a bit and just summarise the game. Let's just take those high-level bullet points from what we got from that game. The All Blacks, they were the better team for sort of 50 to 60 minutes. The All Blacks reserves, they didn't offer enough impact. The All Blacks ill-discipline cost them. It was 14 penalties to 5, and 4 of those All Blacks penalties were in the last 15 minutes when it really mattered. South Africa came storming back to win the game, and they were the better team. Simple. But the reality is these days is that there will be mistakes by the officials. But for the game last week, the result was right. So let's move on and let's look at the game that's in front of us. It's going to be a good one. It's going to be close. I'm excited about it. And there has been a number of changes to both teams, which adds to the challenge of tipping this one with a few unknowns, I guess, from the game last week with those changes. So let's have a quick look at South Africa first. I'm just going to give the key points here. Eben Etzebeth is starting this week. Siya Kolisi is good to go despite requiring surgery on his nose, so that's a good thing. He's going to delay surgery, I believe. Pieter-Steph du Toit, he's back on the flank. There's a change at 9. I'm not too sure if Reinach was dropped or injured, but Grant Williams gets a chance to start anyway. There's changes to 10 and 15, which is pretty key, of course. Perhaps thinking maybe last week was a closer game than expected, and they've reverted back to the experience of Andre Pollard and Willie Leroux. And then, of course, a change on the wing due to Kirtley Adams's concussion, a 5-3 split on the bench, and South Africa is still pretty light in the locking department. Obviously, a lot of injuries. Effectively, Pieter-Steph du Toit is the only lock reserve. Of course, he's starting at the flank, and I would expect Eben Etzebeth to play a full game. If you haven't watched my video on the All Blacks team for this week, please do. But just very high level, Wallace Satiti starting at 6 because Ethan Blackadder is injured. Wallace Satiti quite inexperienced. Cortez Ratama at 9, pretty inexperienced as well. That might be a bit of an indication of TJ Perenara, a couple of one penalty in particular, and then maybe his kicking game wasn't as strong, although he did one very good 50-22. But TJ Perenara's experience on the bench is probably valuable there. Mark Talia replacing Caleb Clark on the left wing. Mark Talia not typically a left wing. Sevu Reece replacing Will Jordan, who now moves to fullback. And there's plenty of experience, or more experience, on the bench with Luke Jacobson coming in as the loose forward reserve, and flexibility because he can play multiple positions in that loose forward area. And TJ, Perenara and Barrett, they'll be on the bench to finish the game. So look, if we were to look at what both teams would want to work on from that game last week for this game ahead, All Blacks, of course, their discipline. Penalty count was just too high. The All Blacks territory and getting out of their own 22 and half. The impact from reserves and closing out the game for the All Blacks. One thing for me is, I guess, certainly when you're trailing the game, you don't kick the ball away. Possession in that last 10 minutes was 67% to South Africa and 33% to the All Blacks. They just dominated that key area. South Africa did, turnover prevention for the All Blacks, specifically in the midfield. Damien Dialende got 3 turnovers and led the turnover count. Post-contact meters, I was looking at some stats today. Can you believe that South Africa had 237 post-contact meters and 106, and the All Blacks had 164? So the All Blacks need to, when they do make contact, it needs to stop there, or they need to try and stop momentum at that point. Missed tackles, 28 missed tackles to 17. The All Blacks missing 28. So South Africa, they only scored 3 tries, and 2 of those were from lineouts. So the All Blacks were lucky that wasn't worse based on 28 missed tackles. So a lot for the All Blacks to work on. South Africa, I just had handling errors. I mean, if South Africa didn't have a few of those handling errors in that first half would have been a bit different, let's be fair. I would have thought that I'd have a few more items, but really they were dominant in most areas, to be fair to them. And I mean, they'll want to make some improvements, hence they've made some positional changes or player changes. They'll start better, or they'll want to look at starting better, but to be fair, the handling errors will fix that as well. Let me know what else you think South Africa need to improve on. I'm sure there's things I've missed. And there's a change to the referee setup. I think it's the same 3 referees that were on field last week. However, it's a different on-field referee and a different TMO this week. So hopefully we can see some improvements from them. We just talk about South African All Blacks wanting to make some improvements. Well, I think the officiating will need to do the same thing. The Springboks and All Blacks have played each other 10 times in Cape Town now. The All Blacks have won 7 of those. South Africa have now beaten the All Blacks in the 3 games in a row. Of course, not 3 games in a row, but the last 3 games that South Africa and All Blacks have played, they've won. So that would have gone back to the game before the World Cup started. South Africa winning reasonably comfortably in the warm-up game. You had the World Cup final, and then you had last week. 2 of those games, the All Blacks had a red card, and of course they were lucky it wasn't 3 last week. So the All Blacks should probably try and avoid that. That's pretty good advice right there. The Freedom Cup is on the line also. Don't forget that. The All Blacks have held that since 2010. So to be fair, South Africa will be very pumped up for this one. Now, who do I think will win? Let's have a quick look at the odds here in New Zealand. South Africa are paying $1.50, so they're pretty strong favourites. The All Blacks are $2.50. The line is 4.5, suggesting, which is that break-even point, suggesting it's going to be very close. If you're going to pick a winner, then it's probably best to go with a margin bet, because I think 1 to 12 is going to be that margin. South Africa, if wanted to win 1 to 12 is $2.70. All Blacks 1 to 12 is $3.60. There's good money there. So if you're going to pick a team, probably pick that 1 to 12 margin is my pick, my suggestion. In terms of try scorers, I like Talia. He's on the left wing. The All Blacks scored 2 tries down that channel last week. Will Jordan doesn't often go a game without scoring a try for the All Blacks. However, he is at fullback this time, and he hasn't played fullback much for the All Blacks. It's pretty safe also to go for a South Africa hooker to be a try scorer. But look, my tip here, considering all of that, I think the All Blacks win a close one here, and they retain the Freedom Cup. I think they've got more to improve on, and they do tend to respond very well after a loss. That's just my tip. That's how I'm reading it. It's an exceptionally difficult one to tip, this one. It is going to be a very exciting game ahead. I am looking forward to it. And if you have watched this video all the way through, thank you very much, and look out for the next one. Cheers.